This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans through conversations with community leaders. Stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glenn White, here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. On our podcast, April and I, as you know, interview community leaders in Arkansas who in some way help work towards solutions across various political or other divides, or maybe who in other ways reach across various divisions within our community. So let's ask April, who do we have as our guest today, April?
Glenn, I'm so excited. We have Nate Bell today, and Nate has been doing a variety of things in recent years, but from 2011 and 2000 to 2017, he actually served in the Arkansas House, where he chaired several key committees. He currently is managing partner of an LLC called Liberty Strategies, and that group provides government affairs, strategy, lobbying, and campaign services. He also consults on commercial and off-grid solar power projects, which is quite interesting. Nate resides in Lincoln, Arkansas, with his wife of 33 years. They have 2 grown daughters and 1 grandson, and animals, I think, as well in their home. We could go on, but we'll have Nate help us know more about his past work and current activities. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Nate.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for the invitation.
Well, I kind of gave you an introduction here, but why don't you fill us in a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point in your life? What takes up your time these days?
Well, these days, other than work, the more important part of life is 7-month-old grandson that you mentioned, and we're very excited to spend time with him. But you can see behind me, I live in a special place. My wife and I built this home with our own hands. It's completely off-grid, 3,100 square feet here, and we built it sustainably with lumber that we sawed from trees from the property. And so it's kind of our little slice of heaven that we have done the way we want to do it. We have 225 acres here in the southwest corner of Washington County that's just old growth timber. It's pristine, and we absolutely love it here, but it takes a lot of work. And so we have an almost 2-acre garden and orchard combination. We fight the deer constantly with that. Finally got a deer fence built this year, but literally all of our spare time, both my wife and I are very busy with our work, but all of our spare time goes into this place.
Well, it sounds like it's a wonderful place and something that brings you a lot of joy and peace, and so impressive that you built it yourself and worked on it being, the sustainability issues related to that. I'm curious, how did you get into doing the LLC work?
Government affairs stuff and all of that is sort of an outgrowth of my time in the legislature and just building that network of contacts and being able to, know what's happening and who is making things happen. And so being able to work on behalf of my clients there and use those relationships to, hopefully get good things done.
I've heard of quite a few legislators over the years that have kind of gone into working to advocate for issues that are important for them. I'm curious, what are some issues that interest you these days, maybe, that you're advocating for, if you can share?
Well, certainly I'm actively involved in the Arkansas Citizens for Transparency, where we're working on amending our state constitution to include protections for the Freedom of Information Act. That's taking up a lot of my time currently. That's an unpaid effort, so you can imagine that means that I, on top of that, still have to earn a living. So that probably is taking up 90% of my time currently. Other than that, I like to work on citizen-related issues with ballot access, voting rights, ensuring that ultimately we have good government. During my time in the legislature, I was what I would say it's fair to characterize me as a good government activist. I worked on a lot of the nuts and bolts things that really don't get a lot of attention, but ultimately, hopefully, leave things better than you found them. So I really worked on making sure that the gears functioned, and a lot of that internal functional stuff that never makes headlines, but brings a smile to my face when I see something work like it's supposed to, and I can look back and go, hey, I made that happen that way. And so that's I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to that kind of thing, but believe that to have a machine that works correctly, you have to have it built correctly.
We usually ask our guests this same question each time. We want to know about their political leanings, and the reason we do that is in Braver Angels, we try to make sure that we have representation across the political spectrum, and so we ask people to identify their political views by color. So if you're extremely, extremely conservative, you'd be solid red. If you're extremely, extremely liberal, you'd be solid blue. And if you're somewhere in the middle, maybe you would be, I don't know, magenta, periwinkle, purple, or whatever it may be. Now, you've, in the past, I know when you were in the legislature, you were identified as a Republican. I'm wondering where you would tell our viewers that you, or our listeners, that you place yourself on the political color spectrum.
Well, I think you have to actually split that. I'm big into making sure that nuances are stated correctly. And if you were to say, with regard to political party identification, I'm about as politically homeless as there is. I don't think I'd be welcomed in either party. My views don't align with either one. Ideologically, I'm quite far to the right. But what that in large part has been rebranded over the last few years, and what the traditional Reagan conservative right is really now identified somewhere much more. Although they'd call us a rhino, I guess these days. But I don't subscribe to a lot of the populist and authoritarian views that are now identified as conservative. But if you were to take the traditional Reagan-style conservative, I fit that mold pretty well. But that leaves me, politically homeless. That's what I tell everybody. I'm a politically homeless conservatarian is the way I describe myself.
Ooh, that's a nice phrase. I like that. So most people, if you think back and look upon your life, you come up with maybe a story or two that you can tell that helps explain why you have particular values politically. Maybe it's something that happened to you early in life, or maybe it's just the values you developed. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how your particular political views developed. What's your story there?
Oh my! It's, how long do you have? When we talk about stories after 40 odd years in active political involvement, I have so many. But I think just watching throughout my life and realizing that government was failing the people, even as a teenager, I recognized that, and that we had to do something different. And of course, at that time, really, I lived in an area where Democrats were running everything. So if we have to do something different, maybe it's, the idea is elect Republicans. And I worked really 30 odd years of my life to accomplish and achieve that, 34 to be exact, and had to come to the realization that wasn't the solution either. And so, where I'm at today, as I've told a number of my legislator friends, I've decided that I can best spend my time focusing on two things. In Arkansas, we have the Citizen Initiative, and so using the Citizen Initiative to enact good government legislation. But more importantly, it's devoting my time to trying to educate ordinary citizens on how their government works, because one of the things that I've learned is that people fear and don't access what they don't understand. And so really trying to make sure that people understand how government does in fact work and how they can make a difference themselves, and to help them understand that, we're more united than we are divided. And ultimately it's, we all have common values. We all have common goals and dreams. International travel really taught me that. And just seeing that no matter where I went in the world, no matter who I talked to, what their political affiliations were, everybody wanted to be safe. Everybody wanted to be loved. Everyone wanted their children to have a future. Everyone wanted to have food on their table. They wanted to have, access to good health care. They wanted to have all of those things matter to people. And, really the ultimate division in our country between liberal and conservative comes down to whether we believe, what role we believe government should play in that, in achieving those objectives. And so, I long for the day when we can get back to debating that instead of, hating on each other. And, hopefully we can do that. One of the things that I saw just this morning, the Center for Politics at University of Virginia released a really substantive study on our divisions, and they talked a lot about things, but a couple of things that really are frightening. 24% of Biden supporters and 31% of Trump supporters said violence is acceptable to stop the other side. And 30% of Biden supporters and 41% of Trump supporters said that democracy is no longer a viable political system and that we have to do something different. 31% of Biden and 37% of Trump said that secession should be an option for states where they disagree. And I look at those things, and it really is a frightening time that we're in our country, because those divisions have become such that people find violence, think that violence is acceptable. But then within that same study, there's also things that really give me hope. When I look at immigration reform, 78% of Biden supporters say they believe we need really comprehensive immigration reform that addresses people who don't have bad intentions and want to come to the United States. And 55% of Trump supporters say the same thing. And so, you have a clear majority of Americans that think that we need to solve this problem, and working together we can. And, I look at other things like teaching of history. There's strong majorities, both in Trump and Biden supporters, who believe that teaching the uncomfortable parts of history is necessary. And so, we see things like that. And, here in Arkansas right now, this effort that we're doing with regard to transparency is really amazing. I've seen the extreme left, the extreme right, and just everybody in the middle come together and focus on an issue that's important to them. And it really has given me so much hope for the future to see that when it comes down to it, people will unite even across vast ideological differences to say, look, this is so important that we have to focus on it, and then go back to arguing and debating. So I think at our core, there's still a lot of opportunity to do that. There are people who just benefit from widening those divisions, and a lot of them are in politics, and even more of them are in media. And it's unfortunate, but they benefit when those divisions are out there and are inflamed.
Yeah, you say a lot of things that are really important, and they're very consistent with what we advocate in Braver Angels, to reach across the aisle, because people are more alike than they are different. We tend to exaggerate our differences, and when we spend time with people in a civil fashion, we find out, gosh, we got more in common than we thought. So that's important. I also liked, it was fairly quick when you talked about it, but the idea of educating citizens. And one thing that a lot of us have talked about would be something I went through. Of course, I'm of a certain age, and I actually got a course in high school on civics, civic education, that would apparently doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. And I'd love to see more of that happen. That may be part of the responsibility we have to make things change. But I really like what you're having to say. Now, when I ask you, what you're talking about clearly shows how you have some different opinions that may or may not go with your former Republican Party, but also some that won't go with the Democratic Party. Looking at the Republican Party and where they're coming from for a moment, I've noticed on social media, sometimes you do criticize some Republicans or conservatives for some of their positions. Clearly, the old Reagan conservative thing is something that happened in the past, and things look very differently now. So I wonder What would you say about these changes in the conservative end of our society? What has happened, and what do you think it bodes for our political environment here in Arkansas?
I think the question is a little bit narrow, and I want to broaden it just a little bit. I think the issue is larger than politics. I think I read an article about 2 years ago by David French that has stuck with me and really altered my thinking on this. We have in America very much a fan culture. We're fans of sports figures. We're fans of particular members of various teams. And in large part, what we've done over the last 40 odd years is we've really begun to mirror that in our politics. And I think it has greatly negatively contributed to how the outcomes that we get. So for example, we will cheer for our team even when we know our team is wrong. And that happens on both sides. Great book on this entire subject by David Frum called Trumpocracy. If you haven't read it, add it to your reading list. It talks about how both the left and the right have contributed to the mess that we're in right now. And I think we're in a situation where people will defend literally the indefensible and things that they know are indefensible because, kind of back to what I alluded to in that study, they just fear the other guy being in charge. And so I think what we have to get past in this country is that idea that my team has to be defended at all costs. But I think even deeper than that, we have to get back to a mutual understanding that fact is fact and that 2 + 2 is 4, no matter who disagrees. And no matter who says it's 5, it's still not 5. And, we've come to a point in this country where many times you can't have an honest discussion or debate about how to resolve an issue because people can't even agree about where we are. And it's kind of like the old discussion of alcoholism or anything else. You really can't solve a problem until you recognize what the problem is. And I think the question goes much deeper than party and really goes into who we are as human beings.
So many things I want to just follow up on here that you've talked about, Nate. Early on in our interview, you mentioned that you consider yourself to be a good government activist, and I think about that term and what it potentially means. And then you've been talking about kind of the that Center for Politics study in which it shows that there are people that are actually thinking that we can't work together, and yet you've provided some examples of where we have or where we potentially could. I would love to hear more about maybe an experience or experiences that you've had working with people who differ from you politically over the years, so that we can kind of see maybe what this looks like. It could be potentially even the work that you're doing with the transparency in government work that you're currently doing. But just love you to tell some experiences there.
Well, I think one of the most profound experiences I've had there would have to be what I'm currently dealing with, and just watching this incredibly diverse group of people find common ground and find ways to work together. But for me, a few years back, I took on a challenge at the state capitol that was important to me, not because it was important to me, but because I felt like it was important to people that I cared about. And that was the separation of the Kingly holiday. And that became a really bitter fight that divided within my party at the time and divided Democrats as well. And it was really interesting to watch. But frankly, I had never given 10 seconds worth of thought to the Kingly holiday. But as a legislator walking in and out of the Capitol and seeing signs on the doors about the Kingly holiday, and having conversations with my black colleagues about it, and recognizing that it was hurtful to them and that it was genuinely painful to them to see that, I decided to file legislation that addressed it. And then watching the reactions from various people and how they responded to that, whether, they took it as a challenge, they saw it as an insult to their heritage, various other things. And, I think for me, it was very defining to be threatened, to have people threatening to burn my home down and various things simply over whether or not we'd have a state holiday that included two people's names versus one. And so for me, it really helped me begin to realize that I think to really confront things that I'd always realized but never confronted. And, how really there were some ugly elements within both parties that, frankly, the first time I ran the bill, Democrats killed it, interestingly enough. And they didn't want to be forced on the record on it. And so, just watching how people would do things that were different than what they publicly stated really, I think, helped me to understand that we have to do things differently and we have to step outside that. But that whole scenario was really formative to me in how I view politics.
Nate, a couple of things that I was thinking about as you were telling the story. One is, there had to be some kind of self-talk that you were talking to yourself about as you were figuring out, am I going to continue going for this or not? And so I'm interested in kind of how you talked yourself through that. But I'm also interested in how you then talk to the people on your own side and across the aisle when you were seeing that they actually were maybe taking different stands than you expected them to. So you want to talk about kind of that communication that was going on for you?
With regard to myself, I'm a bit bullheaded, and I don't tend to jump into things until I have a pretty good idea and pretty solid idea that I'm right. But once I do, I'm really hard-headed, and I tend to just push it forward. And I can be talked off of it, but you're going to have to bring me facts and evidence. And so in that case, once it became clear to me that this needed to happen, I just was going forward with it. And in dealing with colleagues and watching some of them behave in hypocritical fashion, I'm the type of guy I will go to you individually and confront that. And that's what I've always done. That's what I did in that circumstance. And some of them responded positively and some of them responded negatively. One of my strongest allies in that circumstance, interestingly enough, was somebody that a lot of people would not see as an ally. It was former Senator, former Representative Bob Ballinger. He had my back on that bill to the mat in a very contentious state agencies committee where the Republicans are doing everything they could to kill the bill, and Bob represented one of the widest districts in Arkansas and one of the districts that was most opposed to that bill. And but he knew it was the right thing to do, and he had his moral compass set correctly on it, and he didn't back down. And while others that had given lip service to that kind of thing publicly were nowhere to be found, and you couldn't get them in their seat for a vote, he was right there, helping me do, try to get it done. Ultimately, we didn't. Governor Hutchinson took it on the next session, promised me he'd make it a priority. I was gone, but he took it on, and he was able to, push it across the finish line. Always grateful to him for that.
Well, one of the things that you've talked about as in already today in our podcast is you've been talking about, you didn't call it this, but how sometimes we emphasize our own tribe or our own party, and that sometimes gets us to not looking so much at the facts and sound judgment and values. And it seems like that way of doing politics is become effective, especially at the national level. I don't know if you saw it at the state level or not, but at least in the short term for getting people reelected. And I'm curious how we might reduce this kind of I've got to vote with my tribe, and place greater priority on our common values and factual information rather than just what the media might be saying about an issue. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, again, do you have all day? I am, in my political consulting work, one of the things that I've become extremely conscious of and aware of is that the problem we have in our political system are the primaries. Now, we can debate and discuss, and I don't think there is a panacea, what the solution might be. But at the end of the day, small segments of both parties vote in primaries, very tiny segments. We don't have enough people voting in general elections as it is. But when you start looking at primaries, there's almost nobody voting in primaries. In Arkansas, nearly well over 80% of our elections are decided either in the primary or by nobody being opposed. I think in 2022, I believe it was 87%. But it's the vast majority. But when you really start to break that down, because so few people vote in primaries, if you have a contentious primary, it could be as little as 1% of the electorate ultimately making the decision of who's going to govern. And so then you take that and you look at these districts that are drawn to be strongly blue or strongly red. And we can discuss redistricting and gerrymandering ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, while I don't think it's the lone problem, you have districts now that are compartmentalized, and so the only thing you ever have to worry about facing is a primary. You're never going to have a competitive general election in all but about 10 House districts in Arkansas, and all the Senate districts are non-competitive. And so when you have that situation, these folks don't have to worry about appealing to the general electorate at all. They just have to make sure that their base shows up if they get a primary opponent. And so what then begins to happen is they only have to appeal to the most extreme within their party. And so we get those extreme elements beginning to dominate public policy simply because our primary system incentivizes that. And so, I've done a lot of work and will continue to do a lot of work on advancing Final Four voting, which is a combination of an open primary along with ranked choice voting in the general. I think, again, I don't think it's a panacea, but one of the things that I do find interesting is the majority party always opposes it, no matter where it's at, no matter where you try to enact it. So one of the things I laugh about here in Arkansas is, Arkansas Republicans will go, oh, that's a liberal, crazy Democrat idea to elect Democrats. And then you go to Nevada, where Democrats are the majority, and the Democrat Party spent $7 million last election trying to defeat it. Now, it ultimately passed. And I think it has to go back. In Nevada, the constitutional amendments actually have to pass twice. And so it's passed once. It'll be on the next general election ballot. And if it passes, Nevada will have ranked choice voting. But, Democrats viscerally oppose it there because they're the majority. You turn around and go to Alaska, where Alaska has Final Four voting in place, and, Republicans think it's the worst thing ever. And it's just incredibly interesting to watch anything that empowers the people be opposed by strong political majorities. And we've seen that here in Arkansas with the moves to restrict ballot initiatives. The Republican majority in the legislature in the last two electoral cycles referred constitutional amendments that would gut the people's right to ballot initiatives. And, we voted them down 60-40. But they clearly would love to see it where the people couldn't pass legislation because it bothers them. And so, that's a common thread that I see all around the country. Regardless of which party's in power, they want to stay in power, and they're gonna do anything they can to stay in power. A good friend of mine told me a number of years ago. He said one thing you can count on people in power will never vote to restrict their own power. And I'm very conscious of that in the decisions that I make these days.
That makes sense.
I think the thing about that, though, is when you're in power and you're resisting something like that that's good for the country, overall, you're placing your own candidacy or your own party and its success over the good of the country. And another way to look at it is it's more of a short-term view rather than a long-term view. It may be that in the short term it helps you keep your majority, let's say, in your party, but things change. Things evolve over time, and in the long term, you're going to be the victim of that same thing you're resisting the change in. So I think that's one of the problems. Well, April, it looks like we're out of time for our first episode, but clearly we have a lot more to talk about with Nate Bell, so let's ask our listeners to stay tuned for that second part coming up.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand, the first part of our conversation with Nate Bell today. Be sure to check out the second part of this conversation with Nate, as well as other podcast episodes of On the Other Hand. You can find us on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website, and that's found at arkansas.braverangels.org, or you can go to many popular podcast sites.
And when you visit our website, in addition to the links to all our episodes, you'll also find a link where you can email us at otherhandar@gmail.com and provide us with any feedback you have for our program or suggest speakers for us.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glenn White,
and April Chatham Carpenter,
let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.